The Raimi Spider-Man trilogy are in that group of movies that I do not remember seeing for the first time. They've just always been there. Spider-Man 1 might have been my first superhero movie, even. So naturally, with Tobey Maguire's alleged return imminent in No Way Home, I was inspired to look back and try to get some of those topical views.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker is what I would call cartoonishly grounded in that he's relatable, but that relatability is expressed in just absurdly over-the-top ways, an approach that sets the tone of the film beautifully. It's easy to make dorky characters annoying in writing and or performance, but this dork is endearing. If this is a faithful translation of the comics character, then I totally get why he's endured as prominently as he has for nearly 60 years. Fortunately, Peter is just as likable when he dons the Spidey mask. His persona shift to being all cool and confident is good wish fulfillment for those who might relate to the Peter side, but he doesn't lose his likability in the process. Yet. I also really enjoy just seeing him do whatever a spider can. We get some great crime-fighting montages, and those soaring, swinging sequences are always wonderful. The second most important character, Mary Jane, is the love interest, and that's about it. I do think she and Pete have nice chemistry, and Dunst brings a ton of charm to the role. She's genuinely great, and to be frank, totally saves the character, but on paper, MJ is quite limited by the old-fashioned standbys of this genre, and this is not a film interested in bucking those, for better, which I'll get to, and worse, which I just did. Luckily, there's more to be said for MJ later on in the series. Franco's Harry is the weak link in the cast. I think he's alright, but he just never finds his stride like everyone else. He does have a lot of narrative utility, though. We need a link between Peter and Norman, boom, Harry. We need a rival for MJ's affections, boom, Harry. Side note, I really did not mean to jump into another love triangle franchise right after Hunger Games, especially one also featuring Elizabeth Banks.
That is mahogany.
So Harry's not my favorite here, but at least he ends on a great note. You killed my father, prepare to die. Classic. I really don't know what can be said about Dafoe's performance as the Green Goblin. He's a blast. The scenes where he jumps between Norman and Goblin mode are particularly delightful. Yeah, I can't really add my own spin on the obvious. He's the perfect cackling supervillain. He nails it, and I'm very excited to see him return in No Way Home as well. Similarly, I cannot begin to properly honor J.K. Simmons' performance as J. Jonah Jameson.
That's slander.
It is not. I resent that. In print, it's libel.
The adjective that kept popping in my head while watching this movie was basic, but to parse that out a bit, I think I mean archetypal. Peter is a bully. Peter is a bully. Spider-Man 3, spoiler. Peter is a nerd who gets bullied a lot. MJ is literally the girl next door. Harry yearns for his rich father's approval. Uncle Ben is old-fashioned and full of sage wisdom. Aunt May is a kind old lady, so on and so forth. It's also well executed and done with such sincerity, though, that it never comes across as tired or lazy. It's just simple, and that's fine. In fact, here I think it's good. This is basically the new hope of superhero movies. This movie is actually two simple stories, which I had not really noticed before. It's Spider-Man's origin story and his first adventure, but those are separate. Peter goes through his arc and becomes Spider-Man just shy of the halfway point, then he deals with Goblin. There aren't even plot elements connecting Peter getting his powers to Norman's fall from grace, they just coincidentally coincide. I wouldn't call this a major flaw, but it makes the film feel less cohesive to me. There's no connection between the great power, great responsibility theme and his fight with Goblin outside of that being a Spidey responsibility and Goblin using his power wrong, which is fine, just lacks specificity. Something I do consider a Spider-Man shortcoming is the lack of commitment to the idea of the people turning against Spidey. Jameson acts like his bugle hit pieces are doing that, and Goblin declares it a certainty when he tries to corrupt Peter, and I get that the finale beat where a bunch of New Yorkers defend Spidey is supposed to show us that Goblin is wrong, but we had no evidence that he was right. It's not really payoff, and it weakens Norman's position as the philosophical alternative father figure to Uncle Ben, which is definitely what they were going for. So yeah, it all felt tacked on. Alright, let's cut to the chase. Spider-Man is an incredibly fun movie. I know that's not a particularly insightful thing to say, but it's kind of the main thing to say. I really like the darker superhero stuff, don't get me wrong, but this kind of light, goofy movie is absolutely needed in the genre. The filmmaking is so playfully infectious, you have no choice but to embrace its vibe, and this energy carries into the pacing as well. This plot moves like a whirlwind, but thanks to those universally recognizable story elements, I don't think the speed harms anything. All that being said, while again, the unashamed goofiness of this movie is a feature, not a bug, no pun intended, I would be remiss not to mention that every once in a while, I don't know. Something is shot or edited flatly, and the style falls away, and suddenly the movie is just lame. I am pulled out of it, briefly. All this talk of fun isn't to say that there are no emotions in this movie outside of we. There's drama, and the stuff that grips me the most are the beats where Peter lets somebody down. Even small stuff like him forgetting to help paint the kitchen, it just really gets me. It's painful in an engaging way. And what's brilliant is that this stuff is the emotional core of Spider-Man, both film and character. This is a hero driven by the fear of guilt and the guilt of failure. Very human, empathy-reliant things that deeply resonate with me personally. They're also very pedestrian feelings, and I think the secret to the film's success here is that it intentionally starts at that pedestrian level before becoming superhero-sized. He fails to help paint, then he fails to save Uncle Ben. People have long championed the metaphorical coming-of-age reading of this story, the powers and responsibilities that come with being an adult. And yeah, that's why this story has endured over half a century, but I don't think we even have to take it out of its context to see just how fundamental and singular it is. Its theme, with great power comes great responsibility, is basically the crux of all superheroes, their very philosophical core. And to take it back to its metaphor, that's why kids are drawn to them. They are, with a few exceptions, all affirming and inspiring examples of adulthood. I think the superhero genre has grown and evolved just momentously since 2002, and as such, I'm not going to call Spider-Man the best superhero movie. However, due to the elegance with which it exemplifies the essence of that genre, I might call it the superhero movie.
Sometimes, to do what's right, we have to be steady and give up the thing we want the most.
I want to start this section by following up on those instances where the charm dropped for me in Spider-Man 1, because there is not a trace of that in 2. Whatever je ne sais quoi faltered a little bit before has now been completely mastered. And on that note, this action is terrific. I really liked the burning house sequence of the first film in particular, but every Spidey Doc Ock fight blows that out of the water. The bank robbery that turns into a vertical punch-out, and yeah, that renowned train sequence, it is still some of the best superhero action out there. One general area that's a step down is the pacing. I definitely commend the movie for relatively taking its time, especially during the stretch where Peter gives up Spider-Man, but I still prefer the go-go-go of Spider-Man 1. As a general step up, this movie is funny. The first film certainly had its moments, but this time we get dedicated comedy bits, and of course they fit such a lighthearted series perfectly, so much so that in hindsight it's weird that they're only really showing up now. Spider-Man 2 is naturally the young adulthood film to the high school original, and Peter's relatability translates seamlessly into that hectic struggle to find your place in the world that dominates your first few years out of high school. Or 10. Once again, the real-world problems these characters face provide the emotional drive of the film. That well of Peter letting loved ones down is far from dry. In fact, it only gets worse here. Peter's scramble to balance his Spider-Man life and his personal life just keeps screwing over everyone around him. God, when he misses MJ's play, I want to die. MJ's role in 2 is improved. Having her pine after Peter this time around gives her more to do than just be the object of affection for the main character, although she still is, and they still have good chemistry because of that. It also really helps to see MJ in a play. She talked about wanting to be an actor in the first film, but it's stronger characterization if she's actually doing it. MJ's success here also helps the film's central drama, as in contrast, Peter's non-Spidey ambitions are constantly hamstrung. I also have to commend Dunst for MJ's reaction to seeing Peter unmasked. What a moment. Harry here is an underwhelming sandwich on good bread. I like how he starts the movie. Him taking over Oscorp for his father is a logical step up for the character. It gives him something plot important to do while linking him with Otto, and Franco can definitely pull off the slimy businessman role. And his endpoint is terrific. Discovering a supervillain lair after dramatically shattering a mirror as the mental ghost of your father screams, "Avenge me," is, well, you heard what I said. Unfortunately, the bulk of the movie takes place between these 2 points, and during that time, Harry's kind of emotionally stranded. He's just moping around, grumbling about revenge, and being mad at Peter. In fact, I think it's pretty well summed up here.
I have nothing left except Spider-Man.
A truly iconic line, by the way. Everyone says that Doc Ock is the best, and I will sign off on that. First of all, Molina does a great job as just Dr. Octavius. His predecessor had little time to act normal before going all evil, but Otto is much more fleshed out. He's a genuinely admirable guy. Because of that, though, his turn is certainly more jarring, and a poor explanation of why does not help. Finally, while obviously comparing elements of a franchise is kind of the point of this show, I am comparing Otto and Norman a lot here because they're very similar. They're both decent guy goes too far and loses control type villains. Peter looks up to them both in very similar ways, and Norman is even something of a scientist himself. I do think Octavius is the stronger character. He's equally as fun in villain mode, but his initial motives of world-saving science is better than fulfilling a military contract, and his sacrificial death has much more weight than Norman's self-imposed, hero had nothing to do with it, Disney death.
Oh.
While we're doing direct comparisons, Spider-Man 2 is the kind of sequel that's not a conceptual expansion, but rather an emotional exploration of its predecessor. Spider-Man 1 had Peter choosing his Spidey responsibilities over MJ, a stand-in for his normal life, and Spider-Man 2 is that played out. The film spends a lot of time showing just how much Peter is failing to balance his dual life, seemingly confirming that this is a choice he had to make. On top of that, the negative framing of his retirement's aftermath and the triumphant framing of his return seemingly confirms that he chose correctly in the first film. I do like seeing this unfold more in depth. It's emotionally satisfying, and the wrinkle of Peter losing his powers as he loses the will to be Spider-Man is interesting. However, just like how Spider-Man 1 was kind of held back by not being thematically cohesive, Spider-Man 2, which is thematically cohesive, is held back by just not adding that much to the conversation. The ending does keep the film from having no broader momentum, and that's all thanks to MJ. Her decision to run out on her wedding to be with Peter is almost a twist. After the climax, we get the same reasons Peter can't be with her. We even get that tragic shot of them watching each other from a distance, never to be, except then MJ says, screw that. And I'm not entirely sure what that says about the broader ideas at play. The movie seemed pretty adamant that he couldn't have it all, and the theme of sacrificing your dream for the greater good is the through line that ties Peter and Octavius' stories together. It seems to be the point of the movie. Now I am glad that MJ is given agency in such a major way, and I am glad that we get a happy ending on this one, but yeah, never been able to intellectually reconcile that. So yeah, Spider-Man 2 is great. It is a step up from its predecessor despite some new problems. However, it plays it awfully safe, and I can't help but want the series to try something new.
Be careful what you wish for, Parker.
Let's actually ignore the emo elephant in the room for now and first focus on the three villains of Spider-Man 3. And I'd like to start with a very unpopular opinion of mine. I think Venom is fine. I'm very aware that there's a lot more they could have done with them, but especially given that the studio forced Raimi to include the character at all, I think he absolutely fits in the film's puzzle, even as a mediocre piece. Eddie himself is a bit grating, but he functions well as a jerk for Peter to be better than, then later the same as. Plus, giving Peter a nemesis in his civilian life is a fun addition to the story. Venom also works conceptually. If the symbiote represents Peter's darkness, having that manifest externally in the third act through someone he wronged while under its influence is, yeah, there's your climactic fight for sure. The only problem is that Peter didn't wrong Eddie. He rightfully calls him out, just in a mean way, I guess. Thomas Hayden Church's Sandman is a very welcome change of pace as far as Maguire's villains go. He is completely unlike Goblin and Ock, sympathetic all the way through with not a single evil cackle cackled. The juxtaposition of Ock's frantic, Evil Dead light debut and Sandman's beautiful, wordless emergence exemplifies this perfectly. This compassionate portrayal got a lot of credit upon release, but looking back from an era dominated by tragic and misunderstood supervillains, Sandman does strike me as not the most complicated example. However, Church absolutely gives his all in the performance and sells it. My one major gripe with the character isn't the character, rather the retcon that enables him. No matter the drama it allows, we thought this man killed Uncle Ben, but it was this guy actually, will never not strike me as incredibly cheap. At least the ending of his plot, where Peter forgives him, is fairly moving. And finally, Harry. My words are failing me right now. I wish I could communicate my opinions on his role in this movie with something else, like a relevant meme, because he's just
So good.
Spider-Man 3 is Harry's movie as far as I'm concerned. His story here totally makes up for his uninspiring roles in 1 and 2, and the performance is much improved. New Goblin looks dope. Definitely a mid-2000s dope, but still. And him finally coming to superpowered blows with Peter kicks off this trilogy capper in excellent fashion. What's funny is that Spider-Man 3, just like 2, also has to sideline Harry for the bulk of the plot, so here they take a page from the soap opera playbook and give him amnesia, but that is a far, far superior way to delay his next plot beat. There's good tension around when or if Harry will regain his memories and revert to villain mode. His normal interactions with Peter, and especially MJ, solidify their friendships in a way that even Spider-Man 1 didn't quite do. And boy does he have fun when he secretly returns to villainy. Of course, he doesn't stay a villain, and as obvious as his redemptive turn is in the build-up to the climax, when he swoops in and saves Pete in the all is lost moment, gosh, I love it. That and his sacrificial death are exactly the type of sappy, power friendship moments this series was made for. And flipping the Goblin imagery to now be a heroic thing, combined with that personal connection between him and Peter, makes this final battle and his role overall just... oh, play it again.
So good.
Alright, let's see. The filmmaking is toned down just enough to notice, which I get is to fit the darker tone, but still disappointing. Some of the CGI is actually worse than in 2, which always bothers me when sequels get downgrades like that. Yep. Okay, that's everything peripheral. So, Emo Peter. I remember this movie being torn to shreds, dubbed the worst comic book movie ever, almost entirely because of Peter's turn to the dark side. It's so embarrassing, it's so stupid, what were they thinking? This has subsided in recent years, the common rebuttal being, yeah, Peter is a dork, of course his mean streak is super dorky. And I agree with this, I think most of these once ridiculed scenes are actually fun. I mean, is this really any sillier than the rest of these movies? We're not talking about the Dark Knight trilogy or even the Amazing Spider-Man movies here. And I think acting like this is where Raimi jumped the shark is absurd. Still don't think it was the right way to go though. I am on board with Peter being corrupted and becoming a bit of an ass. Suddenly going from the bottom of the social ladder to the very top would probably go to his head. It was for the best that Peter stayed fully likable in Spider-Man 1, but I'm glad that they eventually explored that with the character. Unfortunately, some things that would fit this category, like him being dismissive of MJ's problems and kissing Gwen Stacy at the ceremony, those happen without the symbiote's influence. Once the symbiote does fully take over, it goes too far for me. As soon as Peter becomes good at being bad, like when he brings Gwen on a date to where he knows MJ is working, the film totally lost me. The virtues of this character and the tone of these movies simply do not support genuine cruelty. Similarly, I can get behind him wanting to theoretically kill Sandman for revenge. Both sequels re-emphasize that Uncle Ben was and is a huge part of his life, but him actually doing it as far as he knows and then going, "Good riddance." Same problem. And these attempts at serious darkness fall apart even more because they immediately clash with the dorky darkness I was just defending. It's not a gradual thing. We bounce back and forth for the entire second act, and unfortunately, I don't think a single character can sell me on both. At least not this one. We all make mistakes. I totally get what they were going for with the theme of forgiveness. It ties directly into Sandman and to a lesser extent Harry, but we do not all cross the lines that Peter does here, and relatability is such a core feature of this character, the audience definitely notices when it's gone. I think this is what the emo Peter haters were unable to articulate. It was never really about the cringe. It was about losing the grounded emotional anchor of an otherwise cringe series. And I'd argue that the film knows this because the everyman role is filled here by Mary Jane. We get a clever reversal of Spider-Man 2, where now Peter is living the life and MJ is down on her luck, and on its own I like this. I feel more for MJ in 3 than in the previous films. It was a good choice, but it feels like it was made out of necessity. MJ has to be Peter because Peter is being Eddie, and Eddie is being Venom, and Venom is being hated by comics fans. I pointed out that Spider-Man 2 is fundamentally an in-depth thematic reprise of Spider-Man 1, and Spider-Man 3 makes me ask if that was for a reason. I don't mean to imply a lack of depth when I say this, but I wonder if this iteration of Peter Parker is simply not versatile. Spider-Man 2 in particular is viewed as an all-time classic very much because of how perfectly tuned he is to explore his original strife. But as a trade-off, maybe his stories can't really have a different dramatic backbone, at least not without inherently feeling like a mismatch or a downgrade. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I have a limited understanding of the character, and maybe I'm putting too much weight on one misstep, but either way, this one misstep does unfortunately mean that this trailblazing trilogy does end on a far from meritless, but still slightly disappointing note.
With great power comes great responsibility.
It's amazing how a trio of deeply unserious superhero movies laid the foundation for superhero movies to be treated seriously, and I think that's a great testament to their quality. I really wish Spider-Man 4 had happened. The lack of cohesion problem from 1 was addressed in 2, 2's lack of ambition was addressed in 3, so maybe we could have hit perfection with one more go, but oh well. These films do deserve the reverence they're treated with, they absolutely still hold up, even the flawed finale. So if you somehow haven't seen these movies yet, they are definitely worth a watch before the crowd goes wild when Maguire thwips his way into the MCU. Allegedly. People have speculated. Mr. Feige, Kevin, I know nothing. I saw nothing. I definitely didn't share any tweets. Kevin,